All right. All right, everybody. Made it through the rain. Okay, so last week when we were leaving, somebody pulled out of the parking lot onto Britain. Their book fell off the car or off the truck, whatever it was, and all the footstep papers. Anybody know who it is? Here's their book. I didn't really look through it to see if there's a name, but there's a lot of notes. I didn't see the truck. Did you see the truck? No.
Tag inside.
Yeah, I didn't like, I just saw that there's a lot of notes in there, so. Okay,
Oh, no.
all right. So we are, who we got here?
Got it.
Anybody got any questions on what we've been doing so far? We covered resentments. Everybody's straight with that. And we start talking about the fears, right? So in resentment, if you think about it, right? Resentment, you're attaching yourself to the person you hate the most through a resentment. And that's got to mess you up, right? And the reason you do that is because what the word means. Feel again, and feel again, and feel again. And so, and then now with fears is like strapping on 100 pounds, you know, and trying to get through the day, you know, and you're walking out of your house and you're walking down the street and you got all this weight on your shoulders and you got all this insanity in your head going on. And, you know, it's very difficult to trudge the road of happy destiny when you're thinking about him and her and it and them and you're worried about this and that. And life becomes so damn heavy. So the purpose of the fourth step is to identify these things. So in 5, 6, and 7, you can start getting rid of them, right? And free yourself of this stuff. Okay. Really not getting rid of anything in the fourth step. But you'll lose a lot of this stuff just by the process of doing it. But the object is to identify, right? Like Bill uses, don't forget his example of the business inventory, right? The business inventory doesn't change anything but you. And it gives you the awareness to do what you have to do and make the changes you have to make. And that's exactly what happens here in our life. Okay. When you got all of this stuff going on in your head and you got all of these fears going on, life is just too damn heavy. And we got to learn to get rid of all that stuff. Okay. So that's what we're talking about. So the second manifestation of self is the fears that we've been talking about. And really, you can break fears down to two things. It's probably worthwhile to expand that, but if you really want to get technical, everything's about a fear of living and a fear of dying. Right? Can anybody give me an example of a fear? Any fear? Height, fear of heights. Okay, that's a fear of dying.
So if you're falling?
Yeah. So everything is really a fear of living or a fear of dying. Okay. So you can umbrella that. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes under that. I'm going to give you some things that you should write down now. These are what we call fear elements. They're 4 basic traits of all alcoholics. Okay. And we call them the 4 elements. The fear elements. In no particular order. Ultra sensitivity. See? You'll chuckle with all of them. Ultra sensitivity. Ultra childishness.
Say that again, please.
Ultra childishness. Ultra egocentricity. Okay. And ultra grandiosity. Okay.
No.
Those four things are elements, what we call them fear elements. So everything that we feel and go through is really classified under those four things. In other words, irritability, defiance, pouting, arguing, loneliness, depression, elation, aggressiveness, stubbornness, determination, dishonesty, nervousness, restlessness. All of these things these are the manifestations that stem from the elements of fear, the four elements of fear that we talked about. Frustration, all of this stuff. So it's good to know this. So a couple of you came in late and somebody lost their book last week. Their big book, yeah. And lost it on the street out there. So all right. So anyway, it's good to know these things. Just so if you have this information in your head, you might pick up on it one day. And it's not just sensitivity, it's ultra sensitivity, right? And all four of these things are ultra to the max. Okay. And these is how things that warp us. And everybody got a 4-step sheet? The 4-step sheets? Everybody's got a copy? You didn't get one last week?
I didn't have a whole set.
Okay. I got a few more here. Give me a couple here. And then come and get one. Now don't write on these because you need to make copies.
There's a prompt sheet in that.
So
Are these the last of it?
where's my okay.
There's a good set.
Should give you a set. Okay. Okay. So when we talk about when you're doing the fear list, okay. So column 1, it says list people, institutions, or principles with whom I am fearful of. Okay. And these are some of the things that there's the prompt list on there will help you, but fear of what people are gonna think of us, fears connected with our significant other, our children, our job, with the police. We don't realize how much fear controls us, dominates our thinking until we get it down on paper. So once we get it down on paper, we realize that, I made a decision back in the 3rd step that God's going to be the director of my thinking. And these fears direct me, God doesn't. So I want to be able to change that. In the 2nd column, we're going to put what it says here. What are they likely going to do to me? Am I going to go to jail? Will I lose something with material value? Am I going to lose face? Will it result in a divorce? Will it destroy my personal relationship? Will I lose my job? Okay. So most fears are centered on 3 things. I'm afraid I'm going to lose something I already got. I'm afraid I'm not going to get something that I want. And I've done something to somebody or some institution, and I'm afraid of what they're going to do when they catch me or when they find out. Okay. Those are your 3 basic things that drive us. Now, you remember the mantra for the resentments? We're going to use the same mantra for fear. Because I can't experience fear unless there's a threat to one of my basic instincts. So does anybody remember the mantra that we talked about? I guess you did.
Yeah.
Say it over and over again. Huh? Right, we're gonna change it to fear now. Fear comes from a threat to any basic instinct. Okay, can't do anything about other people. Can't do anything about what other people do, but maybe with God's help, I can react differently and not be afraid. If I'm not afraid, there's no fear. No fear, I'm not blocked off from God.
Please say that again.
Fear comes from a threat to any basic instinct. Can't do anything about other people. Can't do anything about what other people do. But maybe with God's help, I can react differently and not be afraid. If I'm not afraid, there's no fear. If there's no fear, I'm not blocked off from God. There was a guy in Los Angeles, one of the original AA members. His name was Norm Alpe. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of Norm. He's got some tapes out there somewhere. He used to do a thing on inches and seconds. Inches and seconds. He was a pretty funny guy, but he was so what he used to talk about is that life is all about inches and seconds. Okay. And that what we do in recovery is we learn how to respond to life rather than react to life. So in other words, if something happens, if somebody says something that upsets me, or some situation is in front of me where I'm getting afraid, have some fear going on, normally everything is like right on me, like right on my face, and I have to react and get it off of me, right? It's right here. I got to get it off. And what Norm was always preaching and trying to teach people is just to take it and go like that. Just a couple inches so you could take a look at it. Pause. Take a look at it. Learn how to respond rather than react. If it's right on me, I can only react. But if I remember inches and seconds, because that's really what life is all about. Inches and seconds. I could go like this and I could look at it. And 99.9% of the time, you're going to find, hey, I know this. I'm familiar with this. I've been here before. I know what happens if I go down that road, or if I react that way, or if I let this upset me or make me scared. Excuse me. So recovery is about different, right? We're going to do things different, right? Learn different things. And so if you start practicing that, the next time you get upset or the next time you get fearful, just pause for a second and take a look at it. And I guarantee you, like I said, 99.9% of the time, you're going to realize this is something you've experienced before. Maybe it's dressed differently, but you've experienced it before. Resentment and fear comes in disguises, right? But it's all the same shit. If you can learn to respond, you'll realize that this is really nothing different. I know what's going to happen to me if I do this or do that or do, and so I learn how to respond. And sometimes the best thing to do is nothing. Take a pause and talk to somebody. Pick up the phone. Those 3 things I told you back in week 1 or week 2 or week 3, back on the first step, those 3 things work in all areas of your life. You remember what they were?
Mm-hmm. Pray about
That's
it,
right.
write about it.
That's right. Talk about it, pray about it, write about it. I guarantee that's the greatest tool that you'll ever get here in recovery. Talk about it, write about it, pray about it. Just take a minute to do that. Just make a quick list of what's going to happen if I do what I want to do, the good and the bad, and take a look at that. Get on your knees and ask God for some help. talk to somebody else about what's in your head. This is all about learning how to respond to life. And again, fear, if any basic instinct, somebody's trying to get in, if there's a basic instinct that has been threatened, that's the only time I can experience fear. But if I do these things, you know what happens? I wind up hooking up with God. And with God, I fear nothing. It's only the absence of God that allows fear. Right? Without God, fill in the blank. I fear whatever. With God, there's no fear. So oven by itself, I think we said this last week, fear is actually a good thing because fear brings caution and if used correctly, keeps me from getting hurt. If used correctly. It's probably safe to say that nobody in this room started out using fear correctly. In fact, we don't use fear at all. Fear uses us. But as you get sober and as you stay sober and as you grow spiritually and as you do this stuff, you learn how to deal with these things. And life is completely different when these things aren't driving you. They're not the driving forces behind how you are and how you be. Right? All right. So again, I can't experience fear unless there's a threat to one of my basic instincts. And maybe if I wasn't such a frightened individual to begin with, I wouldn't have experienced as much fear as I did. Okay. If I was more considerate towards everything in column 5, right? If I was more considerate towards others, people in institutions, I wouldn't be doing the things that cause them to come back and retaliate and cause pain and suffering in my life. So it's just it's a perpetual, continuous, insane movement. And I have to eventually break the wheel. Now, let's go to page 68 in the book. So back on back on 67, we had the resentment prayer, right? Not the prayer in the back of the story somewhere, that 2-week deal thing. That's not the resentment prayer. But here on page 68, you now have the fear prayer. Okay. And it's down at the third paragraph. It says, we never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality is the way of weakness. Paradoxically, is the way of strength. The verdict of ages is that faith means courage. Now, here's the fear prayer. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let him demonstrate through us what he can do. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be at once we commence to outgrow fear. So, wow. If fear has been the corroding thread in our life, running through every fabric of our life, isn't it amazing that we now have a solution for that? And you can see that just in a matter of talking for a minute, we've discovered that we can, instead of having every corroding aspect of my life ruined with fear, I don't have to be a victim to that no more. Now, unfortunately, most of us will remain volunteers. But I don't have to be. All right. You got a question? Oh, okay. So inches and seconds. Inches and seconds. Any situation is right on us. We want to remove it just to look at it. So we learn how to respond rather than react to life. Little tricks and little things like that is gonna raise your spirituality level unbelievably, because you're not going to fall prey to this shit no more. You're not going to be a slave to all of these things that always ran you. You now have a little power. Now, not that you have the power, but you have the power because these things bring you closer to God. And with God, there's no fear. So, any questions on resentments? Any questions on fears? John?
What was you say? That guy's name was Norm what?
Norm Alpe. I don't know if you can find any of his tapes. If I go up in my attic and dig through an old box, I might find you one. But
A-L-P-E-Y?
no,
Close to it?
ALPIE or something like that.
I'll find it. It's on YouTube.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I've listened.
Oh wow. I haven't listened to him in 20 years or more, but he was really good when I was new in my first 10 years in recovery. I listened to him and he was really good. And he talks about like what I talk about inches and seconds. That was his stick. Okay. All right. So nobody needs to talk about fears or resentments. Now,
I do have a question.
yes.
On your inventory, so you list the fear, and then in the second column, I was taught to list, what happened that caused that fear, but you're saying really look at the worst case scenario, what could happen from the fear. I like it.
Well, that's what could happen from the fear is what you're really afraid of. So the second column is the cause. What is the cause of your fear?
So kind of look at the worst case, get it out there. Okay.
Yeah, why do I have this fear?
That's the main question.
So, and it's usually, see what you're doing here. You're looking at yourself, Jenny, because you're asking yourself, what are they going to do to me? That's what's causing the fear. You're asking yourself, am I going to go to jail? That's what's causing the fear. It's, if Bob, if you're have fear concerning Bob, well, why? Probably there's something that you did that caused that fear, that caused you to have that fear. So you're going to look at that.
Okay, so it is the source of, okay. So as an example, I have a fear of being alone in a house. And in my second column, when I put was I remembered, I had forgotten why I have it here, and I remembered because when I was a little girl, I was home sick alone, and some guys broke into the house. So that's what I wrote down in the second column.
Right.
That fear coming.
Yeah.
But really, am I afraid of what can happen to Jessica?
No, that's, what caused the fear? Well, a prior burglary or something when you was a kid. Somebody broke in the house when you were alone. That caused the fear. Yeah. So it's why am I in fear of this?
So would you follow it up with like what you thought would happen or could happen with that?
Well, in column four, you could now the same thing here in column 4 as in resentments. Remember, I said in resentments, if you really take a look at it and you realize I didn't have any part in this resentment, you don't leave it blank. You put how you acted and reacted to whatever happened to you. Same thing here in column 4. So now in column 4 for you in that instance, you would put, that you were a scared girl home alone and somebody broke into the house. And so many years ago, when that happened to you, you were a victim. The last 20 or 30 years, you've been a volunteer to that pain and that suffering.
So is that the answer? At the latter part of what you just said?
Allow it to
Reliving it over and over. That mistake.
Well, we're talking about a fear, and the resentment is feeling it again, right? But in the same respect for the fear is nobody's breaking into her house now, so she's not a victim now.
But the fear is not unfounded.
No, it's not unfounded, but, well, you can argue that. Is it unfounded? 35 years ago, somebody broke into a house. Certainly it wasn't unfounded then. But, I could sit down and argue with you about, is it unfounded now? And it's not so much about being unfounded, nor is it about being right or wrong. It gets to the same thing that what it said in the resentment, that we're going to look at it from an entirely different angle. Remember that in the resentment? And the entirely different angle is, doesn't matter who did what to me and what it affected or what my part was. The thing that's important is I got a resentment, I got to get rid of it. Well, the same thing applies here. It doesn't matter what happened and when it happened. If this fear is still driving me today, it needs to go. So it may be a process. It may be a process of discussing it, talking about it, and realizing that I'm okay today.
It depends on the level of impairment as well. If you're making decisions and it's impairing your life, like you have 10 locks on your door, you have cameras all over the place, you're consumed by that.
You get in a relationship. So
And
you
that
don't get
impairment,
along.
yeah, you need to let go of that fear. But if that's something that, you just think about before you leave the house or
Yeah,
when you go to sleep at night,
yeah, it depends. So it's different level of
it
it.
has
Yeah,
to do with how it's impairing your own life. Like you said with the resentments, if you have to think about who you're mad at,
you're not mad at
you're
that.
not mad at them.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm asking is, what is the answer?
The answer in column 4 is that all these years, it's been affecting her that she can't be home alone without being in fear.
Thank you.
Because again, if in column 4, if you had no part in it, you put down how you acted and reacted to what happened to you, whether it's fear, resentment, or sex, or any part of the inventory. So that's what goes in column 4 and that particular thing, and that is, and again, the degree of that depends, on how much work you got to do. It could be a little bit, it's not so much a big thing today. It could be huge,
Well, and like your example last week about getting on the ladder and going, God demonstrating that he's got your back and then he's
Yeah.
good for you. Like those, you don't go and volunteer to get at the top of the ladder
No.
every day. But working through that fear is what you're hoping to get
Yeah.
from.
We had to get a ladder today in the restaurant, and I told the kid, bring the ladder over, and I was about to climb up, and I said, get up there and fix that thing. I'm paying your ass. Get up there and fix it. Yeah, I got it. I know you got it.
So, will I be correct, like when I wrote this, will I be correct if I say that fear blocks them from God?
Yes.
Because fear is a lack of faith.
I would say.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Without God, fear exists. Okay. The lack of God is what allows fear to exist. Yeah. And the fear prayer is exactly proving that. Because the fear prayer counters that. It tells you to, ask God to remove your fear and direct your attention to what he would have you be. So it's changing your mind frame. And that has to be applied at the moment. You don't want to apply it 2 days later. You want to apply it at the moment. When fear exists, you have to counter it.
So wouldn't you say that in column 4, what we're identifying, because that's what we're doing, is we're identifying those things within ourselves, the behaviors, the reactions, and everything that have hindered our life because of it.
Yeah, because you're describing how you acted and reacted to it if you had no part.
But if I don't know.
If you had a part, like if I robbed you, right now I'm afraid what you're gonna do when you find out. That's different.
That's a different.
So in column 4, I would put I robbed you. But if I didn't do anything to you and I'm afraid of you, why? What is?
Well, so for example, I was in an abusive relationship.
Okay.
And from that point on, every man I encountered, I treated as if he was an abuser, whether he was or not.
Yeah.
So by doing that, out of that fear, I robbed them and myself of any kind of like,
Sure.
yeah,
You can't see who you're dealing with because
all I see
the
is that.
abuser is in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all right, she can't see anyway. There's this guy here that's blocking
I grew up with that.
her. Yeah. All right, but yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, listen, remember what we said last week. Every one of these fears is learned, right? The only two fears every human being is born with is the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Every child is born with those are God-given instinctive fears. Everything else is learned. So we only got to unlearn them. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but it works. Okay, so you inches and seconds. Learn to respond. Learn to get in touch with God. The fear prayer puts you in touch with God. With God, I don't fear being alone at home, or whatever the case may be.
Along with cameras and motion detectors.
She hit the nail on the head, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's based on the decisions that we make on those fears.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what you're gonna find out in the fourth one. Yeah. All right.
Something we can do something about.
Absolutely. Yes, we can do something about it. Yeah, but this is a process. This doesn't happen, because you want it to. You have to work at it.
Yep.
If you want to be successful in recovery, you have to work at it. I always say the only time you'll ever see success preceding work is in the dictionary. Everything else in life, you have to work at to be successful. And if you work at it, you become successful. And if you just want to be successful without working at it, it ain't going to happen. And alcoholics are good at that kind of stuff. Yeah. We build castles in the sky, don't we? So always remember that self-will can't fix self-will. Self-will cannot fix self-will. So you'll have to learn how to tap into God's will. Okay. And the fear prayer puts you there. It puts you into God's will. It's asking for that, isn't it? God, remove my fear, direct my attention what you would have me be. If that's not asking for God's will, what is? That's asking God for God's will. Not asking her or him or it or them for God's will. All right. Anybody else want to talk about fear more? We can talk about it if you want. Resentment, fear.
Fear of being a responsibility.
Oh, that's a dirty word. Don't talk like that in here. Responsibility. Yeah, what about it?
Yeah, you start getting sober, you start getting a little real success, and then people want you to do stuff, What do you do about that?
That's the first one on my list.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? You have to participate in life sober. There's just no way around that shit. Yeah, being responsible sometimes is not always cracked up to be.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. Did you have something to say, Mike? You always got something to say.
Yeah. Fear of the Lord, meaning of knowledge.
Okay.
So, as far as that fear goes, it gets down to the three feelings that a human being has. They're either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So I get the opportunity to write down what I think is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. I can always change the unpleasant into either a neutral or to a pleasant feeling. If I think about the Creator, got back to son and everything. It's like when I was in the grocery store and there was a heat wave going on. And this woman said, oh, God, what do you think about this heat? I said, well, God could make it a lot hotter.
So it's all about door number one, door number two, and door number three. The problem with us is we take the pleasant attitude and we make it unpleasant. We gotta learn how to kind of be balanced. All right. Anybody else?
Yeah, Danny.
Yes.
One thing that I've been concentrating on too is something you said, I don't know, a few weeks ago about getting out of the result business.
That's the third step. The word care in the third step. Third step is all about getting out of result business.
But you can use it in the fear part too. If you're afraid of being alone and you ask God to protect you, it doesn't necessarily mean that something bad isn't going to happen. It's just how you're going to react to it when it does happen. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, the idea, the result business goes through, you learn that in the third step, but it's not married to the third step. It goes to anything in life that you, what I want to do is I want to check my motives. I want to do the best I can. And then whatever happens is none of my business. And we learn that as we learn in the third step how to stop acting on self-will and try to hook up with God and God's will. All right. But don't forget, in the third step, the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. So that's where that comes from, but that's not just pertinent to that step. It goes through everything. Yeah.
On page 85, it says, every day is the day we must carry the vision of God's will in all our gifts. How can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. These thoughts must go with us constantly. We can exercise our willpower along this line all we wish. It is the proper use of the will. Would you speak into that? I know.
Yeah, that comes later in the steps. That's but really, in a nutshell, what he's saying is we have to learn how to take our will, right, and it's saying align our will with God's will. That's the proper use of the will, right? So instead of me running the show, I'm gonna think. There's a little saying that's real appropriate. If it be thy will. So if something that I'm thinking of doing, I ask if it be thy will, and then I ask, what is God's will in something like this? Well, I can't figure these, no matter where you're at in recovery, you're never going to be able to figure that question out by yourself. That's why talk about it, write about it, pray about it, always brings you to the right spot. So when I learn to align my will with God's will, that is the proper use of the will. So if I check myself before I wreck myself, I can do that. And we'll get into that more when we get into the 10th step. But that's what it's asking us to do. It's asking us to align our will with God's will. And it's telling us that is the proper use of the will. So if I'm going to use my willpower, that's the way it should be used. Because that's the proper use of the will. Okay. But that's a little ahead of where we're at right now. We'll get there though. All right. Yeah. All right. Back to the book. Page 68. Now about sex. Now, this is very interesting. The second sentence says, many of us needed an overhauling there. Let's just stop a minute and look at that. Because that's an interesting saying. Let me ask you a question. Can I overhaul a sex act that I had 10 years ago? No? Can I overhaul a sex act that I had last month? Can I overhaul a sex act from yesterday? No. So right here, there's a clue for you, and you need to understand this clue. That when we talk about the sex inventory in the fourth step, it's the first and only time that we're not talking about the past. And it even tells us when we read on, it's going to tell us that we're going to do this so we can shape a better sex life for our future. Because I cannot overhaul an act that's already done. Now I want to look at it. I want to be able to inventory it. I want to be able to take a look at it. I want to be able to go over that. But the purpose of doing those things is so I can have a better sex life in the future. So many of us needed an overhauling there. Well, I can't overhaul yesterday or last year, but I can overhaul my future sex life. So, and also another difference on your sheets, you're going to fill out your sheets on your sex inventory, but there's questions on page 69 that need to be answered for every relationship. Besides doing your columns, you need to go through that checklist. We'll get there in a minute, but so what I should have said this. What we're really talking about in the sex inventory is the mental part, not the physical. Right? It's not about who's in my bed, but rather what's in my head.
I love all your little rhymes.
So it's not about I was screwing the neighbor's wife in the kitchen. No, that's not what it's about. It's about what lack of morals, what lack of principles, what lack of values allowed you to be with your neighbor's wife. Not the physical, the mental. You understand? The sex inventory is the mental. It is not physical. If we inventory the mental part of it, we'll be able to overhaul our sexual conduct in the future. If we look at the physical part of our sex thing, we're just wasting time. And I tell you about one of the guys that wrote erotica that turned into the sheet to me, right? It was really good. It had nothing to do with the fourth step, though. Now, you might want to write this down. The cause of all sex problems, and this may shock you, is either fear, resentment, dishonesty, or selfishness, period. The cause of all sex problems is either fear, resentment, dishonesty, or selfishness.
Fear, resentment.
Dishonesty.
And selfishness.
Again, Danny,
Yes.
again, repeat that again.
Oh, what'd I say? The cause of all sex problems is either fear, resentment, dishonesty, or selfishness.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
Is this about only, or because I did a workshop, she was saying the sex inventory isn't just about people that we've had sexual relations with or whatever, or that it's more of it, people that I'm close with as well, like dad have a relationship or just intimacy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would get really nervous if I saw somebody give me their fourth step with their dad on the sex inventory part. No, it's not about your dad in this part. That belongs elsewhere. Right. So here's the thing. I'm glad you asked that because you made me think of something. Here's the thing, right? Almost all the time, when you have a problem, when you have an issue sexually, right? It's almost never the top surface thing, right? Like you see a guy running around the room screwing everybody, right? When you say, "Oh, he's a horny little bastard," no, you know. And like for myself, that what I found is that I wasn't so much a horny little bastard. I was more very undersecure. So there's underlying things, and that we're going to find out as we inventory that dominate our life, and it's really nothing to do with the sex stuff. So, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, because, you know, the way I kind of look at it is when I use the sex instinct to satisfy one of my own instincts, the insecurity, self-esteem.
Fear, resentment.
Well, and all.
How
of
old are you
those-
now, if you don't mind my asking?
How old?
Yeah.
She's old.
Okay. So it's safe to say that at your age, you're never, ever, ever again going to use the sex instinct for the God-given natural reason.
Oh, procreation.
Yes.
But he made it enjoyable for a reason, okay?
So we would.
Yeah, but
yeah.
still.
Yeah.
Well, I know.
Yeah. So what we're going to find out is, yeah, there's a lot into this. We're going to talk about this next week too. We can't knock this off in 15 minutes. Yeah. Nobody likes a quickie when it comes to sex, right?
You have to hurry.
And as soon as this is over, we're going to go outside and smoke, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Everything that you're going to work the steps on, because after you work the steps on alcohol and drugs, you don't need to work the steps on alcohol and drugs again, right? So, but you need to keep working the steps. So everything you're going to work the steps on is but a symptom. Okay. So, and was being responsible in sex issues ever connected with you? I'm just joking. All right. So the difference between human beings and all other species is that every other species on Earth, I think, except for maybe dolphins, I heard that somewhere. No, I think dolphins are the only ones that, but every other species have sex at God's direction to reproduce. But I think dolphins do it for joy too.
I think I've heard that before too.
I think so, yeah. So therefore, barring dolphins, you know, none of these other animals, you've never seen a cow on the psychiatrist's couch. He won't kiss me, you know. That doesn't happen. It's so with human beings, we think about sex before sex, we think about sex during sex, and we think about sex after sex. No other animals, I don't know what goes through a dolphin's mind, but all the other species, they don't do that. They get a direction from God, it's that time, and they reproduce. But because we think about sex before sex, we think about sex during sex, we think about sex after sex, there's going to come a time that we're going to be in the wrong place, the wrong time, with the wrong person or persons for the wrong reasons.
I thought we were the only species that had to buy dinner.
There might be a mating thing with some other species, but so it's very interesting when you think about it. And what you said, right? God made it enjoyable. Sure, He made it enjoyable, so He would ensure that we do it. And He made it so enjoyable that not only did He ensure we didn't do it, but we think about it all the time. So you can see that problems will easily arise from this kind of setup. Okay. All right, so let's go back to the book. So he says, we're back on page 68. He says, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off track, way off the track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes, perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it or that it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. Our school would allow a man no flavor for his fare, and the other, one school would allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. Underline that. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbitrator of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? So that's the question. And here's your inventory process. We reviewed our conduct over the years past. So these questions now that I'm reading have to be answered for each relationship that you had. Besides your columns, you have to answer these questions. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Now you can mark some of that on your sheet, but did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? This will go down in column 4. Okay. We got all this down on paper and looked at it. In this way, we try to shape a sane and sound idea for our future sex life. So here's the thing. If we don't answer these questions and inventory and see our patterns, you know what's going to happen? We're going to keep doing the same things. We're going to keep doing the same things. It's going to be a different person, but it's going to be the same thing. Lifelong patterns of abusing yourself and others in this area, and it's not going to change unless you inventory. So we subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? I could probably tell you what your answer is going to be. We ask God to mold our ideas and help us to live up to them. What does that mean? So we're going to learn some things about ourselves during this process. By answering these questions and inventorying, doing these sheets and columns, we're going to learn some things about ourselves. And we need to ask God to help us to live up to this. Because it's just like if you don't want to stop drinking, I don't give a shit how many meetings you go to and how much you read the big book. You're going to get loaded, right? And if you don't look at this, how you've always acted selfishly in your sexual life, you're going to keep doing that stuff. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. Whatever our ideals turn out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. So how do we deal with any problem? We inventory. We find out what our part is, where we're wrong. We make amends where we need to. We ask God to help us. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answers will come if we want. God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. Now, this is interesting here. We got a few minutes left. Suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half truth. It depends on us and our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven and we will have learned our lesson. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience. Let me tell you, let's talk about, just got a couple minutes left. I'm going to talk about 13 stepping for a minute. You see that a lot. It happens all the time. I'll give you my experience. I'm about 5 years sober. And I was doing good in the program, doing all the stuff, growing spiritually. And I hooked up with this woman that had, 60 days or something like that, and I didn't think anything of it, really. And what I learned from that, though, and this is a very, I didn't get drunk over it or anything, but here's what happens. If you're at a spiritual plateau like this, say, right, and you're 5 years sober and you're doing well, you have grown spiritually, no doubt. If you haven't, you're not doing something wrong. 5 years sober, she's 60 days sober. Spiritually, I'm not saying I'm a better person than she is. I'm not trying to say that. But spiritually, come on, 60 days sober, you're not very spiritually fit, right? And here's the lesson that I learned. It is impossible for her to come from here spiritually to where I am spiritually. Impossible. And vice versa, whether it's a man or a woman. But the only thing possible is for me spiritually to get to where she's at. And that's the lesson that I learned. So I work with people today, and when that subject comes up, I tell them, listen, well, just what I told you. Don't advise it. Find something else to do. Excuse my language, but I tell them go home and masturbate. Go on with Mary Palmer and her 5 sisters. Don't do that. And they'll go out and do it anyway, because you got to learn for yourself, right? But it's not a good experience. And there's a lot more to it than that. What we're telling the other person is it's no different in here than it was out there, But I didn't know those things at 5 years sober, not to make excuses, but and that's what I know today. And that's what I try to teach people that I work with today. What message are we trying to put out there? Is it safe in here? If it's safe in here, don't do that shit. No. So, all right. Same time, same channel next week, guys.
Thanks, Danny.
See you guys.
Thanks,
Hey, Danny. Danny, this is Bob in Winchester.
Yeah, Bob.
I'm interested in what you talked about, different levels of spiritual development, and would be interested if maybe you, maybe next week or sometime, had some guidelines on what you look at for differences in spiritual development. Is it something you find out only after the fact, or is that something that you can have some way of
I think
picking up
spiritual
beforehand?
development goes along the way the whole time. It's recognizing it and understanding it, and then utilizing it in your life. But
Yeah,
we'll get through all that. I think we're going to do a lot of that, Bob. And when we get to the 11th step, we're going to focus on that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you got any questions, send me an email.
All right.
Jeff,
great.
how you doing? Dan,
Thank you.
thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Michelle, you okay there, Michelle?
See you next week.
All right, guys. Have a good one.
All right.